Good afternoon and welcome everyone to our webinar, Steps to Success with the EPQ, Realising the Value of Digital Resources. I'm Joyce Martin, founder and director of JCS, which has organised this event because we're dedicated to supporting schools prepare their students for further education with high quality, trusted digital resources, the sort that they will have to use when they go to university. Now, before I introduce our guest speaker, just a few housekeeping points. If you haven't already, please turn off your camera and audio. We hope there'll be plenty of questions, which you can send at any time using the chat option, and they will be answered at the end of the talk. There are too many for the time we have. We will prepare them and email them over to you. And finally, a link to the recording will be emailed to you early next week, along with the slides from the presentation. So, on to the webinar. I am delighted to welcome Dr. Graham Gardner, librarian at Abingdon School, as our speaker today. He and I have had many discussions over the years relating to digital resources, digital literacies, and research skills. And he was an outstanding keynote speaker at our very first Digital Literacy Conference in 2018. I know he will be equally outstanding and very inspiring in his talk today. So welcome, Graham, and over to you.
Thank you, Joyce. Welcome everyone to this webinar on realising the value of digital resources for the EPQ. My aim is that whatever your role in supporting this important qualification, or whether you're new to the qualification or a seasoned veteran, you will be motivated to review and reflect on how your taught skills programme can help maximise the chances of student success. My advice and suggestions are based on working with AQA, but equally applicable to all exam boards. For me, digital resources are fundamental to the EPQ. Most, if not all, of our EPQ candidates should be making use of them. A successful project depends on candidates using a wide range of resources to shape their thinking, writing, and, if relevant, their artifact. In many, if not most cases, such resources will be accessible in physical format, or will not be accessible, rather, in physical format. It's digital, or it's nothing. Equally, however, finding appropriate resources is one of the most common sticking points for EPQ candidates, and I've learned this from teaching and supervising EPQ candidates for the past 14 years, from speaking with other coordinators and supervisors, and of course from reading the annual examiner reports from AQA, like this one. Far too often research appeared to be carrying out some kind of internet search and recording the hits. Such other searches were rarely supported by evidence of evaluation. Many students felt that media alone was good enough, and so forth and so forth. Given this, it makes sense for schools to invest in online platforms that host and curate digital resources. From Britannica to JSTOR, from Gale in Context to Google Arts and Culture, such platforms are very often a far better bet than the wild run to search engines orientated toward ads and click-ons. The best platforms offer a wealth of relevant content that isn't available on the open internet. The best platforms offer tools to help candidates find relevant resources and make connections between them. The best platforms offer a degree of invaluable quality control. If, however, we want our candidates to realise the full value of these platforms, we must do more than simply invest in them. We must also ensure that they are embedded in our taught skills programme. And that means selecting and promoting platforms that have the potential to benefit the majority of candidates, explaining and demonstrating the importance of those platforms for EPQ success, and showing how specific aspects of specific platforms can assist specific aspects of the research process. And for the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to show you why that's the case and what that concept looks like in practice. It is not enough to simply invest in digital resource platforms and leave it entirely to our candidates to work out how and where they fit in with their learning. Yet, that's often, in effect, what happens. It's certainly what I used to do, and I see a lot of purely laissez-faire attitude for this aspect of the taught skills program. And I also see a lot of general advice on the importance of information resources, and that's obviously important, but it's not far enough. Generic instruction on online research skills will only go so far. as will one-shot instruction sessions for online platforms, all things which, if you're a librarian, you will know are probably part and parcel of your normal practice. Pretty much any advice disconnected from wider research instruction basically is problematic. Now, it's not to say that if you just do that stuff, that all candidates will automatically fail to realize their potential. There will always be some candidates who basically can just run with what you give them. Many, however, will fail to appreciate the relevance of the resources available to them. That in turn could lead to disengagement, as candidates fail to find resources that help them drive their project forward. And others will learn that they should be using those platforms, but struggle to put that idea into practice. A major obstacle here is the expectations and preconceptions that candidates bring to the research process. They are conditioned by Google, TikTok, and online forums such as Reddit and Quora. They expect online platforms to be intuitive, to require minimal effort. And they've also come to think of platforms like Google and TikTok and Reddit and Quora as containing the secrets of the universe. EPQ research just doesn't work like that. A related obstacle is excessive cognitive load. The EPQ makes huge demands in terms of independent thinking and learning. Students have to grapple with formulating suitably complex and evaluative projects, with the subject content and skills relevant to their project, with a need to explicitly plan, document, and reflect on their thinking and practice. Working out how unfamiliar platforms relate to all of that results for many in cognitive overload. And in turn, unhelpful preconceptions and excessive cognitive load can easily lead to emotional strain, uncertainty, frustration, doubt, and even demoralization. As Carol Colflew has demonstrated, the research process is not only a matter of thinking, it's also a matter of feeling. Emotional disturbance can quickly result in candidates avoiding or abandoning what they regard as the source of that disturbance. They ignore that fact at our peril. If we're going to persuade candidates to fully engage with the platforms we know will benefit them, we need to do what we can to address and mitigate those three obstacles. That means minimizing extraneous cognitive and emotional load, managing the load, which is going to be intrinsic to any learning process, at the same time that we avoid spoon-feeding or being otherwise overly directive. Our objectives are to remove obstacles, prioritize engagement, reading and critical thinking, but also to respect the realities of our information environment and the emotional lives and cognitive limits of our learners. So where do we start? With three goals in mind. Students must understand the importance overall of digital platforms for their projects, which online platforms are most likely to be of use for their project, and the relevance of platform features, again, to their own research. This process starts with deciding which platforms you're actually going to promote. 4 criteria are key here. First is the relevance of particular platforms to common topic areas. Student projects vary a lot, but often basically my experience shows you can identify typical patterns and trends. Some topics come up far more often than others. We get a sense of this by looking at the past projects our students have undertaken, and of course getting an overview of our current cohort. At Abingdon, for example, I've learned that students often undertake projects on international affairs, science, technology, health, wellbeing, and drama. So I prioritize platforms that are most relevant to those topic areas. Second, we should consider what type of resources a platform offers and how this relates to what our candidates are likely to need. So every candidate pretty much needs access to those kind of reference, also known as tertiary resources, that provide basic overviews and summaries of topic areas to help them get to grips with it. They also need high quality analysis and commentary, but aimed at non-specialist audiences as they ease their way into their research. Last but not least, they need peer-reviewed, aka scholarly articles and books. And some candidates also are likely to need access to raw data, original documents, still images, and perhaps video and audio. So all those things should be taken into consideration. Ease of use is a huge factor. A platform might offer great content, but if the interface is poor, its appeal to value in students takes a hit. To be fair, that's not really an issue anymore with modern educational subscription platforms, but it can be with free platforms. And don't just rely on your own judgment here. Take advantage of free trials, test them with students, get feedback, see what works for them. Fourth, of course, is we have to consider what we can afford. Schools will differ hugely in this respect, and I doubt that any of us will be in a position to purchase every platform that we think is worthwhile. We have to work out where we can gain the most value for money, and that decision, of course, is related to the three criteria I've just outlined. At Abingdon, taking account into all those criteria and being blessed with a fairly generous library budget, my shortlist is on the screen in front of you here, particularly things like Gale and Context, which offer databases across history, science, global issues, and so forth, JSTOR, Britannica, Credo Source, and so forth. Previously, at a school where I could afford only to subscribe to JSTOR, I placed much greater emphasis on free platforms which are still available. Some of those I still use today, and some of those can be useful if your budget really is being squeezed. Affordability is a big sticking point. I found that two strategies can help. First is persuading academic departments to cover some or all of the cost. And that works best when you can show what a particular platform can do for a particular department. So it's worth spending time working out what are departmental goals and how a platform might fit in. Librarians and EPQ coordinators should be talking to one another and to heads of department. If that doesn't work, you can make a direct appeal to your director of finance. I did this in my previous school. It was the only reason why I could afford JSTOR. Such appeals are most likely to succeed when you can make a strong case framed in terms of student success. And I hope that the arguments I'm making today could help you do this. Once you've gone through that process and found platforms that work for you, resist the temptation to simply bung them all center stage. Even from the ones you want students to understand, you want to still drill down and find 3, 4, maybe 5 key platforms that you think are going to provide the most value for the most students. Okay. At Abingdon, for example, I use Gale and Context greatly for the databases across the whole of the EPQ process. I also use Britannica, Complete Issues, Wikipedia, and YouTube at the early stages of the process, and later on bring in JSTOR and Google Scholar. If students use no other platforms, I want them to have experience of working for them. So that's key before you even start teaching students. There are major opportunities, though, for really embedding these platforms into the actual teaching process itself. The first thing is to work out when and where to embed them. And my recommendation is basically that they should feature pretty much across most of the Talk Skills program. So this is my schedule for a typical year in the life of EPQ. And everything in red is basically where those platforms are featured. And as you can see, most of my sessions, apart from a standalone project management session, feature digital platforms. Basically, that way you stand the best chance of keeping digital platforms at the forefront of basically people's minds. Now, within that, I suggest you make the most of every teaching opportunity. And for me, that's 3 things. It's those in-person or recorded presentations where you're talking directly to students. Use visual aids, for example. A picture tells 1,000 words, particularly with an audience which is much more habituated to screens and popular visual culture and lots of text. I will go into detail in a moment. Also, make use of bespoke guidance. Write guidance for your students which incorporates references to these resources. These are great opportunities to spell out 2 things: the connection between what students should be doing and how particular aspects of particular digital platforms can help them achieve their goals. Last but not least, a dedicated EPQ online resource area, bearing in mind that we are talking about online resources. That can be hosted on whatever educational platform you have access to, whether it's a VLE such as Firefly or Moodle, a library management system, or simply Google Sites, which I've used successfully. Currently, I'm using Firefly. This is the landing page for all my students. As I hope you can see, it's not organized around digital platforms. Rather, it's organized around the distinct components of the EPQ process that candidates expect to see. Basically, the references to digital platforms are then incorporated in the detailed guidance that students then access. This is because while platforms are hugely important for EPQ success, they are ultimately means to ends rather than ends in themselves. Our talk program should reflect that and help candidates to understand it too. Let's look at some of the nitty-gritty of the Taught Skills program. First and foremost, if we want students to take digital platforms seriously, we must start by helping them realize the extent to which EPQ success depends on research, pure and simple. Without that understanding, many candidates simply won't make the connection between their project and our urges to use those platforms. Making that connection is a common perennial challenge. As a recent AQA examiner report puts it, a lack of understanding that this is a research qualification is seen rather frequently. So we should never assume that most of our candidates will appreciate that the EPQ is a research qualification. Whether they're faced with a live workshop, a lecture, a piece of written guidance, a web page, most students will have this simple question in mind. Remind me again, why are we doing this? It's down to us to tell them the answer. If we don't, everything else we do will be a waste of time and effort. Helping candidates appreciate the importance of research begins with showing them the mark scheme. And I do this in every first lesson with a new cohort. Show them how much their final mark will depend on evidence of detailed research involving the selection and evaluation of a wide range of relevant resources. Experience has taught me that this is the most effective way to get students over this key threshold, the point where they're thinking, I get why this guidance is important. The next step is to help students build a mental bridge between understanding the importance of research for their project and the value of digital resources. Again, this should happen right at the start of the Taught Skills program. Acknowledge student preconceptions head on. Show your candidates that we know darn well that most of you are thinking, I'll just use Google. This image normally is guaranteed to get a laugh. Then show them why their preconceptions are wrong. And I use 2 slides for this. One is to point out just how much is hidden from them on the internet when they use a simple search engine like Google. And the other makes the point that academic publishing is a huge multi-billion-pound business, and therefore they're not going to get much if they go looking for stuff for free. Disturbing preconceptions will make candidates far more receptive to the idea that they are going to have to use the platforms we recommend to them if they want their project to be a success. And it's at that point that we should show candidates what's on offer. We shouldn't at this stage go into too much detail. We should simply show them where to find the platforms we want them to engage with, encourage them to take a look, and reassure them that they will find and be given guidance on how to make the most of them. Screenshots such as this one are a great help here. For the cohort that starts in January 2024, I'll be introducing something new, a simple table that features all of the platforms I want them to engage with, complete with basic information on what topic areas they cover, what types of resources they offer, and how to access them. It will be based on this spreadsheet I developed for subject teachers. So at Abingdon, all of this takes place in the first lesson of the Taught Skills program, along with the guidance on the website and then the written guidance they give to all students. Getting candidates to the point of understanding why they should be using platforms is a necessary starting point, but we also need to go much, much further. At every stage of teaching, we should seek to identify and make the most of opportunities to show candidates how specific features of specific platforms could be relevant to their needs. I'm going to illustrate this briefly, how this can be done effectively, from the point at which candidates are in the early stages of working out topics and titles through to the start of a planning review. So once candidates are receptive to the principal idea of using digital platforms for their projects, they're likely to be receptive to more specific guidance. Equally, as they get stuck into their projects, it's easy for them to forget fundamentals. So remind them. I use this quote on the board in front of me to basically get them back in the swing of thinking that basically they should be thinking about research all the time. Okay. And I then as well obviously talk them through how research is integral, for example, to the development of a good title. Simple visuals which just help to embed the idea deep within their brain. That even in the early stages, you don't just choose a topic and then go off and research. You're bringing in research from the very start to inform and shape your thinking. Once that's clear, you can talk about the kind of resources that help them at that point and point them towards the platforms which offer them. On the screen in front of you is an example of my written guidance, which does just that. Having told them about the importance of background reading, it then goes into finer detail, says, you're not expected to go to books or big, chunky academic articles. Here's what you need. Here literally is where you'll find them. And here is a Google Doc, and my links are embedded in that. They go straight from reading about the importance of resources, the types of resources they need, where they can be found, and one click away, there, bang, the resource is there on the screen in front of them. And of course, I also, in that guidance, will also be continually reminding them how these platforms fit into their particular stage of the research process. So here is a brief overview of Britannica and Wikipedia, both of which I recommend. A reminder there highlighted in red, how valuable they are. Okay. And similarly, I'll give them a tour of Gale in Context, but this won't be a grand tour where I talk about everything the platform can do. That's just cognitive overload. Stress they don't need. I show them what they need at this stage of the process. So in terms of Gale, I would show them how to browse topics to find stuff that's relevant to their subjects. I would point to the particular types of resource that Gale neatly separates out and say, look here, for example, reference resources are your friend. Just use those for now, or perhaps the featured viewpoints as well to get a sense of where there is an argument going on. You keep the discussion as tightly focused as possible so that students can always appreciate relevance of what you are talking about. Last but not least with Gale, I give them a quick tour of Topic Finder. This is a great tool which basically links topic areas to resources which may be connected or take students down a route which they may not have even thought of before. Making connections in order to make research projects more complex or to narrow them down is a key part of the process. So as I'm talking about this tool, I'm not just saying, hey, this is a gizmo. I'm saying this is how it feeds into integral parts of the research process. So always I'm trying to continually build and reinforce the mental bridge between student projects and the digital platforms that can help them achieve their goals. And when it comes to the candidate proposal and planning review, we should employ the same set of principles. Assume, because it's safest to do so, that candidates will be impatient to get on with their projects, and therefore we need to remind candidates of the importance of research for the EPQ, drawing their attention, of course, back to the research screen. And then, again, identify the types of resource they should be looking for at this stage of the EPQ process. And here as elsewhere, we should be as specific as possible. Finding appropriate resources is not just a numbers game, but quantity does count alongside relevance and credibility. If we are not directive, many students will flounder. They will end up with a planning review or a candidate proposal that won't serve as robust foundations for their thinking and writing. And consequently, I make it clear to candidates that I will not approve any candidate proposal that falls short of a stated resource requirement. 6 resources, clearly identified, nothing tertiary or reference at this point. Students should have moved past that stage. At least 2 of them peer-reviewed, and of course, all of them justified with reference to both relevance and credibility. Likewise, I instruct supervisors that they are not to sign off any planning review which fall short of these criteria. At this point, candidates should be in no doubt as to their goals. They really need to have their goals absolutely at the forefront of their thinking. Equally, however, this is the point at which many will revert to the unhelpful preconceptions that we have worked so hard to help them overcome. Faced with a substantial task, which is well beyond their comfort zone, uncomfortable emotions drive many students back towards the comfort of what they are familiar with, which usually is Google. I know this from interrogating students. Their most frequent reaction is, oh, this is too big for me. How on earth do I proceed? Help. I'm going back to my best friend, Google. This is the safest assumption to make unless you have strong evidence to the contrary. So again, repetition, reminding students, first of all, how little Google is likely to help in this context. Okay, because once our candidates are clear about their research goals and they have overcome any temptation to get Googling, they will be receptive to guidance on the nitty-gritty of using platforms to help find particular resources. This is then the best point, as with earlier stages of research, that we show how particular platforms can help them. And as before, we keep this discussion as tightly focused as possible, homing in on what's relevant to the task at hand. For example, it's only in the guidance for the candidate proposal that I properly introduce candidates to peer-reviewed research. Having told candidates they would need to use such resources, I outline their characteristics and their significance in terms of enabling candidates to think and write appropriately. And it's only then that I've paved the way for an introduction to the platform I want to use, which is JSTOR, the single largest interdisciplinary repository of peer-reviewed journals. It's an invaluable platform for EPQ candidates, but many find it intimidating. If they don't understand its value, they're likely to basically bypass it completely or tune out when we really get into the depths of showing them how to use it. We don't want that. Candidates are most likely to use JSTOR, like any platform, when they appreciate the extent to which their needs coincide with what the platform offers. Many, if not most candidates, will not make that connection on their own. The Taught Skills program must make a compelling case for using it. And the same is true of another equally useful platform at this stage, which is Gale in Context again. My goal is for students working on their candidate proposals and planning reviews to be thinking and feeling along the lines of the imaginary student who's taken up residence inside my head. Okay, I know what I need. I know why I need it. I know where to find it, which in this case is Gale and JSTOR. Few, it was worth paying attention. Our ultimate aim, whenever we are teaching candidates how to find appropriate resources for their projects, is to help them understand what they need, why they need it, and where to look for it. Everything we do should be in the service of that aim. Now, obviously, there is a much more to getting candidates to realize the full value of digital platforms. That's beyond the scope of this webinar. If you are a librarian, as I know many of you are listening, this will be your meat and drink, and you probably don't need much advice from me. Obviously, it takes in research strategies, keywords, useful tools such as filters, and of course, the wonderful citation tools, which almost all of subscription resources offer, which make referencing much easier for students. But if you're interested in how you can use images and other guidance to help really get students in the game of that, I've included a few screenshots from my own work in the supplementary slides, which you will get after this webinar finishes. So just a few things there, for example, on using keywords, how to hook JSTOR into Google, which is very, very helpful to get students using it, and obviously citation tools, which mean the days of putting complicated references together by hand are hopefully at an end. I hope you've learned at least something new, something interesting, something you think was of value over the last 29 and a half minutes. I truly believe, from 14 years of experience, from speaking with other supervisors and coordinators, and from working with the exam board, that basically embedding online resource platforms into the taught skills program is essential if we want students to actually realize the value of those digital platforms, which can make such a difference to their projects. I've explained the key principles, I think, on which we should work, and I hope I made it clear what students need to understand if they are to use those platforms properly, and also precisely what it is that we need to do, which is to remove all those unnecessary and unhelpful obstacles, to prioritize engagement, reading and critical thinking, and to respect the realities of our current information environment and the cognitive limits and emotional lives of learners. I hope that something of what I've said has at least motivated you to go and review and reflect on your own taught skills program with a view to helping your students achieving the success that they are certainly capable of. Thank you very much for watching and listening.
Graham, thank you very much indeed. There are lots of thank yous coming through on the chat. We've got a few questions, which I'll pass over to you. So first of all, have you got any thoughts on integrating AI search with the platforms? Are any already offering this kind of search facility?
As far as I'm aware, that hasn't happened yet. It would seem to be an obvious next step. It's something I haven't yet engaged with. My one thought on that would be that a lot of the AI I see around is geared towards providing, you might call a sort of a human output, a single answer, rather than enabling students to then engage in the kind of critical analysis and evaluation, which is integral. So I suspect there are some difficult conversations to be had around that, but I'm sure it's only a matter of time. Bearing in mind that AI Assist is now a standard feature of most of the standard commercial search engines, I'm sure others aren't far behind.
Okay, thank you. Now, someone would also like to know about any training that's available for teaching the use of JSTOR.
Well, so JSTOR offer a lot in terms of videos and stuff, which you can access via the site. In addition, I've got some bespoke material that I've created for Abingdon, which is good for teachers who are new to the platform, sort of a starter pack. I'm very happy to share that with anybody who requests it. I mean, you can reach out to me directly, graham.gardner@abingdon.org.uk. Please don't hesitate to get in touch.
Great, thank you. And any requests that come through to us, obviously we can ask Graham to share with us for you. So obviously you spoke well of Gale, the Gale in Context titles, and the questions come through. Do you subscribe to JCS? And yeah, anything else in relation to that?
Yes, is the answer. I do subscribe through JCS. JCS tends to be my go-to place for subscription platforms for school because they've got so many of them and it's very well curated, and I've just come to trust the service that they provide. I also go elsewhere. There are other platforms which sort of aren't through JCS. One of the great things about Gale is you can kind of go as little or as large as you like. So there are 6 databases covering, I think, world history, American history, science, the environment, global issues, one called Opposing Viewpoints and Context, which kind of says exactly what it does on the tin, and all of them offer this brilliant blend of primary resources, reference resources, statistical data, quality magazine and website articles and analysis, audio, video and images in some cases, and of course those all-important peer-reviewed resources. That's sounding a bit like an infomercial. It's really not meant to be. I think if you were going to build a platform which was tailor-made for the EPQ, then Gale would be it. And I've gone through it with JCS, and you can subscribe to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 platforms. They're all really good value for money and comparatively cheap in their own right. And the more you subscribe to, the cheaper they are per unit. I'd just advise anyone interested to go out there and get a trial and really get to know the platform yourself before showing it to any teachers or anyone else that you think might be interested. Learn what it can do, and you'll be in a position to basically sell its benefits.
Great, thank you. Kind of leads on to another question. How do you do everything that you do? the librarian, you're the EPQ coordinator, you do a bit of teaching. How on earth? And not to mention all the resources you provided.
It's something I try not to think about too often. Is the quick and glib answer to that, Joyce. I think brutal prioritization is a part of that. So I was employed here, going on for 10 years ago, and very specifically to be an academic librarian, to be a research lead, and that's with teachers as well as with students. So I also perform a role within our teaching and learning team, helping teachers with professional development. And it is a lot of work, but a lot of it revolves around core principles. A lot of that is about finding appropriate resources to support teaching and learning, and then to help people make the most of those resources. And once the core principles are leveled, you can then apply them to sort of any context. Obviously, it does mean there are things I probably do not do as much of or as well as some of the other librarians. I do promote reading for pleasure. I'm a huge reader myself. I believe in its value wholeheartedly, but I don't, for example, spend time getting involved in, for example, what's preoccupying many librarians at the moment, which is the Carnegie Medal. I'm looking with interest. I'll do a display, but I won't be taking part any more than that. And that is how I can free up time to make room. I do have assistant librarians, the equivalent of one full-time person a week. In my previous role at previous school, it was just me. I was a one-man band, and obviously that does free me up to do things. But I do a lot of standard library work as well. So, for example, all the many books which come through this library are catalogued by me. You just do get more efficient as the days go by.
Yes. And at the end of the day, sometimes I guess it's about having to make decisions, and sometimes some things just don't get done, or you
definitely.
You have to prioritize. It's like every job, isn't it?
It is. And I think actually, what's the greatest impact I can make? What does the school want from me? What actually do I think is most valuable in a world in which information is both the most valuable commodity and also the most compromised asset? It's to be that person that can help students and teachers make the most of what's available to them and steer their way around the gnarly obstacles in their path.
Excellent, thank you. Sort of related around organisation, another question. What is your schedule for your taught skills programme?
Okay, so we run the EPQ at Abingdon over the course of a year from January through to December. And my taught skills program runs weekly from about the second week of January through to the end of the summer term. And then for the first half of the current Christmas or Michaelmas term, depending on how you refer to it, there are 20 individual face-to-face sessions with students, a combination of lecture type things and small group workshops. But on top of that, I make it very, very clear that that is not all the taught skills program is about. It's not just about me standing in a room and talking at them or even doing a workshop. It's about them engaging with the additional resources which I provide, which includes copious, detailed, written guidance on all aspects of the program, and also, of course, that all-important web portal. But really, I think the taught skills program should be a consistent presence in the program right up to and possibly past the point that students have done their presentation and are in the closing stages of the project. One point is worth adding as well. I run the taught skills program completely in parallel with students working on their project. I don't teach a load of skills up front and then get them started, because it just doesn't make sense to students that they need to be motivated by their own project and see how the skills fit in. But yeah, weekly sessions, around 20 in all, plus all that supplementary guidance.
Goodness, that's quite a big effort, but well worth it. I'm sure you're getting very good results from your boys.
We are. I mean, it is a selective school, but despite that, through really quite substantially evolving and developing the taught skills program over the year, we've both managed to increase the numbers that enroll, increase the numbers that stay through to the end, and really get our success rates really up there. And I'm always delighted to see the number of students where they get a result which both means that, excuse me, while my background just goes dark, it both means that they are able to realize their potential. And also, of course, it makes a huge difference with a high mark, whether it makes an impact for a university application. But for me, that taught skills program is critical, because otherwise, without a decent one, the EPQ is simply a winnowing exercise in which the strong survive and the rest of them drop out. For me, success in an EPQ is a student realizing that they are capable of producing something which they didn't imagine they were capable of at the start of the process. And of course, then having the benefit of skills which they can carry forward into university and beyond.
Yes. Yeah. There's no question about that. Good. Thank you. So there's this CRAAP course or piece of training. How do you cover it? And if so, how?
Yes and no. For those that aren't a librarian, CRAP is basically an acronym, and it's referring to the all-important process of how students evaluate their resources. So it's not enough, obviously, to find resources and know for yourself that they are relevant. You must be able to demonstrate in writing to your supervisor and ultimately the internal and external moderators that they are appropriate resources to use for the project. Librarians over the past few years have developed all kinds of methods and trying to get catchy methods to encourage students to engage with this process. For example, of looking, is the resource you're using up to date? Is it representing the most recent area of research? Or have you got something from 30 years ago which is not relevant? Is it, in fact, a peer-reviewed resource, or is it from some other form of reputable publication, or is it some random person just putting a blog post up there, in which case you've got no grounds for credibility? This focus on using digital platforms, there is an extent to which it can give students confidence in the resources they get, because there is a high degree of quality control in those sort of platforms. And so one of the things I encourage students to do as part of their evaluation is to actually discuss the platforms that they're using and to acknowledge that they're aware of what quality control goes on behind the scenes. I think that's an important part of resource evaluation. It doesn't take away the need to look at each resource they find and consider, obviously, its relevance to their project, but also its suitability, its credibility. What level is it at? Is it a very simple explanation of a process, or is it a very high-level article which enables them to sort of consider multiple viewpoints? I don't teach CRAAP, which to the best of my memory stands for currency, recency, Anyway, it covers all those things. I want students to have a more almost, qualitative approach to it, to look at each resource in the context of their aims, what counts as credible in the context of their actual research. A credible article, for example, for an English-based EPQ is very different from a physics-based EPQ. I encourage them to use a method developed by a journalist, which called the 4 moves, where they go looking online to see if there is corroboration for an argument, whether there are contrasting viewpoints, and also to find something about the people that actually lie behind it, to see information and resources as wholly human constructs. So it's a very holistic way of looking at evaluation. It is more difficult to teach than things like CRAAP, but ultimately I think it puts students in a better position to understand why they're doing this and to develop a more critical outlook on information generally.
It's kind of like learning on the job.
Very much so. Yeah.
It's learning the skill when you need it, and you'll remember it better.
Very much so. And also realizing that, credibility is something which is very, very relevant to context. I've got a student at the moment who is just completing a project on QAnon. He's using lots of resources which are scrapings from websites and stuff. And obviously those are a vital part of his project. They are credible resources in the sense that they represent some of the conspiracy theories that are out there, and he will talk about them in that vein. And he has done a very good job of doing that. There's a really good book. I should just add, there's a really good book which I've got from, it's published by Follett, I think, over in the US. Very simple, aimed at HE librarians, but I think really gives a great perspective on this. It's something to do, it has context in the title. Information, I think it's called Information Literacy in Context. But anyone interested, reach out to me, graham.gardner@abingdon.org.uk.
Yeah, it's ringing a bell. So yes, okay, we'll get the title. I think the final question is become apparent to me is that you really get to know all your resources. I mean, from your whole presentation today, it is evident that you've got quite deep learning and understanding of what these resources are and what they do and what they provide. So can you tell us, I mean, because again, that's something else that must take up a lot of your time, but can you tell us about how you go about this?
Yes. So if I were to define my role at Abingdon in 2 words, it would be this: information intermediary. There is quite simply no one else in the organization who has the sort of designated task or the time or the freedom or the knowledge or the skills to see out of the amazing array of potential resources out there what might be helpful for both students and teachers directly and indirectly. So you could say that really all of my role is centered on that process of identifying what's out there, evaluating it, really getting to know it. And then if I think it is going to be useful, then investing in it. And I don't just mean monetarily, I mean embedding it in all the kind of teaching that I do and helping teachers to embed it in their teaching program as well. That in turn involves a huge amount of collaboration. So this is not a job I do in isolation. If I'm considering a resource, if it's for anything other than the EPQ, and even for the EPQ, I talk to pods, I talk to subject teachers, and of course I talk to students. I get their feedback on it. They are the people who are most likely to be using these resources. I have to be sure. I have had cases where I thought something is brilliant and students have completely turned their noses up, but nothing I say will convince them otherwise. There's absolutely no point of sort of going with that. So information intermediary helps students and teachers find or have access to the best of what's out there, and then also to develop the skills and knowledge to make the most of it, and also steer them clear of some of the stuff that can lead them astray. I put that front and center of my practice here. It kind of guides everything I do. That's what it all in the end boils down to.
And of course, what does really help, certainly I know this is the case via JCS, you can get a trial, you can spend time looking at the resources involving students, involving the staff. So that's a big, you don't have to invest in anything until you've got it. Okay. Thank you, Graham, very much indeed. Obviously, if any more questions come through, I'll email them over and we can compile more for the attendees today. Thank you very much.
Not at all. Thank you very much indeed, Joyce. Thank you to everyone who's been spending their precious time and attention on this session. I hope you found it valuable.